Welcome back to Now Let's Be Honest. I'm David Tate, and Brienne's out of town this week, so looks like y'all are stuck with me as we do this recap of the Song of Solomon. For those of y'all who are new to the series, basically what we're doing is that over the course of the summer, Brienne and I are leading my high school students through the Song of Solomon as we talk about principles of godly romance and godly relationships and godly love in general. And then after we lead them through a much more extensive 1.5 to 2 hour long Bible study, then we're going to come in here and we're going to basically do like a 30-minute or so recap where we kind of just hit the main point and don't go as in depth, but really address the main things going on in the song, just so that y'all are kind of up to date with it too, just to get more content out there. And also because I think the Song of Solomon is a book that more people need to be talking about. It's actually one of my favorite books of the Bible. And so that's what we're doing today, and I don't want to waste any time, so let's hop right into it. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be hopping in at chapter 1, verse 12. We covered the first 11 verses last week. And today we are entering into what I would suggest are probably the closest parallels that the Bible gives us to the modern practice of dating. Obviously, dating was not a thing that existed back in ancient times. That is a very modern concept. And this is something that I actually talked about with my group, how whenever we approach relationships nowadays, we have to realize that we're approaching them from a fundamentally different manner than how most relationships have been pursued throughout human history. Throughout human history, most relationships, including like just marriage relationships, have been pursued from a more communal aspect where it was viewed as the binding of two families together, and therefore you had mostly arranged marriages for the majority of human history. And it's really only in modern years with the rise of Western culture and stuff like that, that we have really seen the adoption, and really is over the past few centuries and stuff, the adoption of a very individualistic mindset in regards to relationships, where love is less about choice and action, and it's more just about feelings. And I think that that's kind of sad, but there's also this really added benefit to the idea that you get to choose your partner, which is really, really useful. And obviously there was an element of choice to all relationships prior to that because people had to consent to those arranged marriages. But we just have to realize that we are in a very different culture nowadays than biblical marriages. But still, it's amazing how close Song of Solomon gets to the modern practice of dating. It's almost prophetic in that way, because what we see going on with this young couple in the Song of Solomon is very similar to what I would say we experience nowadays in the American form of dating. It's basically this process of evaluation where we've gone beyond the station of like we've gone beyond just initial attraction, and we haven't quite gotten to courtship yet. We're at some weird middle ground where the couple is spending more time together and they're evaluating whether or not they want to fully commit to this relationship. And that's basically what dating is. And so where we find them in this song is perfectly akin to what we call dating. And so when we go into this, we're looking at principles that Christians living in the modern world, in the modern era, in Western culture who have this practice of dating, we're looking at principles that you can draw from this couple to figure out how you should pursue this in a wise manner. So last week we talked about principles of godly attraction. Today we're going to talk about principles of godly dating. And I just called this considering love, right? As you are considering the idea of covenanting yourself to this person forever, what are some different principles that you should look for in this person? And so we hop right in and we start in chapter 1, verse 12, and we just pick up right where we left off in verse 11. So in verse 11, you'll remember that the friends of this couple spoke up and they basically said, we are going to do whatever we can to support what y'all have going on here. The man complimented the girl on her jewelry, and the friend said, you know what? We'll go make you some more jewelry. If that's the kind of stuff that he likes, then we want to help encourage that. And so they said that they're going to do whatever they can to really help this relationship flourish, which is just super amazing and helpful to be surrounded by friends who can help you do that. But now we're going to cut back to the woman, and we're going to see a few things here. And forgive me if I have to look down at my notes occasionally, but I wrote down some notes here just to help me stay concise, because I could easily talk about this stuff for hours. But what we're going to see here is that first off, through what the woman says in verses 12 through 14, we are going to see first off how the man views her, and then secondly, how she views the man. So she's going to describe how he views her in the first verse, in verse 12, and then she's going to respond and say how she views him. And so what she says is this: while the king was at his banqueting table, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. Here, once again, we see something that she did earlier on in the same chapter, where she views this man as if he were a king. And we know at this point in the song, she doesn't have any reason to think that he actually is a king. As far as she knows, he's just a shepherd boy. But the way that this man treats her is as if she were a queen. And so it's almost like the way he treats her sends her off into fairy tale mode, and she views this guy as a king. And the imagery that we're getting across here in our discussion with my students, they were really debating, okay, is this metaphorical? Is this literal? And I really don't like putting things in boxes like that, because ultimately what we have to realize is that we are dealing with poetry. And so what we really shouldn't be asking is whether it's literal or metaphorical. We should ask, what does it mean? Because ultimately we need to get the message behind it, and whether it's literal or metaphorical doesn't really matter. And so when we're approaching this, we just have to run with the imagery. While the king was at his banqueting table, my perfume gave forth its fragrance. So she is portraying this man as a king, and he's at a banqueting table. So if you can imagine it, there's a king in a palace, he's at a banqueting table. The imagery is that of a party, right? So her man is at a party, and she says that while he's at this party, her perfume gave forth its fragrance. Now, there's two ways you could take it, and scholars will debate about which way to take it. I have my own favorite way, and I'll tell you right now. But the idea is that either he is at the party and she is so close to him that her perfume is wafting up into his nostrils, or it's also the idea, and this is the one I kind of favor because of what we've seen earlier in the chapter. I think that what she's really getting at here is that she is not with him at the party. Right? The king is over at the party. She's not there. He's out there hanging out with his friends, having a great time. But even whenever he is with his friends and away from her, her perfume is still spreading forth its fragrance. If you go back to the beginning of chapter 1, she described this man as having fragrant perfumes, and that his name was like perfume poured out, right? It was like an anointed perfume. It was like a very powerful perfume. I think what she's getting at here is that even whenever they're apart from one another, her presence is still felt, because he is telling his friends about her, and he can't stop talking about this girl. Her name is constantly on his lips. And I think what we see here is that we see the development of the relationship as they're beginning to get more public with their affection, right? And so to me, it seems like we do have the maturation of this relationship, where before there was just this initial attraction, but now as they're growing with one another, growing alongside one another, he's beginning to tell his friends about her, just as she's already told her friends about him. And for this girl, this has got to be amazing, because she views him as a king. She views herself as nothing but this lowly little Cinderella-like vineyard worker who's just poor and a little bit insecure in some things. And she probably feels like he is way out of her league. Yet here he is at the banqueting table, spreading forth her fragrance, right? Her presence is still felt even whenever they're far apart. And so she views he views her as a pleasing fragrance, which is ironic, because if you go on to verse 13, you'll say that she views him the same way. My beloved is to me a pouch of myrrh which lies all night between my breasts. Myrrh was a super fragrant perfume, so fragrant, in fact, that myrrh would oftentimes be used to anoint dead bodies to help kind of get rid of the nasty smell of that. So that can kind of tell you how strong of a smell myrrh it has. And what could happen, and once again, this is things that, like, pretty much everything in the Song of Solomon is something that scholars debate about. I'm just going to tell you my interpretation, so just roll with me here. And I'm not saying that I'm just making these interpretations up. This is based off of my own reading and research. But what many scholars believe is that women would sometimes adorn themselves with sachets of perfume, including things like myrrh, and they would wear it around, and it was almost kind of like a perfume or deodorant for them as they went throughout their day, so that it would keep them smelling nice. And they would put it around their neck from a little like sachet that hung there, almost like a necklace, and they would go about their day wearing this, and it would just make them smell nice, and it would enhance their appearance so they didn't smell bad. And this woman says that her man is like this to her. It is like a sachet of myrrh lying between her breasts. There might be some sensual imagery behind this, where it's almost like she's evoking the idea that she wants him to be laying there. Like physically, she is almost fantasizing about just holding him close and having her lay there. But in the meantime, since they're not embracing that physical intimacy quite yet, because they're not married, she's just picturing him as that pleasing fragrance. So he views her as a pleasing aroma, and her perfume is spreading forth its fragrance even whenever he's away from her. And then she also views him the same way. She's laying in bed at night, and she's thinking about him, and just the thoughts of him is like a sweet perfume flowing into her nostrils, kind of like a deodorant that enhances your appearance. Just growing in her relationship with him has left her feeling like her life is getting better. It is enhancing her experience of life. That is how she views this guy, which is just really beautiful. I mean, how these two people view one another is super healthy. And if you're looking at just principles of dating, you get to see that these people have a life-giving relationship where it's not just something where, and this is something I'm just addressing from what I see with a lot of my high schoolers, a lot of drama and angst and just unnecessary conflict. That's not what this couple is. This couple, they appreciate one another and they're grateful for one another. And they're never placing unnecessary expectations on the other person. They place the expectations upon themselves, which leaves them free to just enjoy the gift of the other person's love. And that is what you see with these two people. She just appreciates the fact that whenever he's over at the banqueting table, her presence is still felt. And people come up to her and are like, man, your perfume was still smelling even whenever he was away from you. And then that leaves her so overwhelmed that she's laying in bed at night and it's like he's right there with her and she just smells that sweet perfume. And if you don't believe me, whenever I say that this is a life-giving relationship, go on to verse 14. Not only is he like a sachet of myrrh lying between her breasts, but she says this, my beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-Gedi. What you need to know about En-Gedi is that this place is an oasis in the middle of the desert. You might remember En-Gedi from the story of David hiding from King Saul, whenever David's on the run and he goes and hides in a cave in En-Gedi. And this is where Saul comes because he's also going to the same place. And he's looking for David and Saul wanders into the cave and this is where David spares him. That's En-Gedi. And if you go to that region, you'll realize that this is in the middle of the Judean desert. Right? This is right next to the Dead Sea. Like the Dead Sea is within eyesight of En-Gedi. And everything is barren. It is the lowest place on earth. It is dry. It is a wasteland. But in the middle of that wasteland is a beautiful oasis with waterfalls and shrubbery and trees. And it's a gorgeous place. And you can understand why David would want to flee there. But this woman says that her man is like a cluster of flowers from En-Gedi. He is like a source of luxuriant life in the midst of a world of death, right? This guy is a life-giving person. The way I wrote it in my notes is that he is something lovely and full of life in the midst of a desert wasteland. You get the idea that the more that this girl sees of this guy, the more impressed she is. And she is left longing for this guy more and more because of the way he treated her, right? It goes back to those initial things that she listed out back in verse 2 and verse 3. That's why I spent so much time on them in the last week's video, because those things are crucial. It's his conduct, it's his cleanliness, it's his character, and it's her community. All these things add up together so that as she gets to know this guy more, she is left more and more impressed by his consistency and his honesty and his clarity and his communication. All these different things about this guy are leaving her overwhelmed so that she feels like he is a source of life when everything around is death. He is a safe place for her to go to. He is a life-giving place where she can just go to him and enjoy life. Whereas a lot of relationships I see nowadays, especially dating relationships, they're just life-sucking, right? It's just, once again, the constant angst and drama and expectations that people place upon one another and the ingratitude they feel towards one another. And that's exactly what happens whenever love is just based off of feeling, but that's not what this couple is doing. Love is an intentional choice where they sacrifice for the sake of the other. And their eyes aren't on themselves. Their eyes are constantly on their beloved, on their darling. They're constantly looking at the other person and saying, what can I do to love this person better? And when you have that sort of mindset in these relationships, and this doesn't just apply in the realms of romance, it applies in all relationships. When you have this mindset, it becomes a life-giving relationship, and that's what this couple does. And sure enough, you see the guy respond in verse 15, and he expresses this exact same thing. He says, behold, you are beautiful, my darling. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are like doves. So he affirms her twice in her beauty, which once again, we know that these words are like ointment to her ears, right? We know that she is insecure about her appearance to some degree, and he's constantly affirming her in her beauty. And he doesn't have to say anything specific. He just has to say, you are beautiful, because that's how he views her. But in this instance, he does give her a specific compliment. He says her eyes are like doves. And scholars will debate about what he's trying to imply whenever he says your eyes are like doves, but ultimately we know that it has to be a compliment, because he's not going to say you're beautiful, by the way, your eyes are weird like doves. He's not saying that. It's a compliment, right? He's probably talking about purity or cleanliness or just the softness of her eyes. That's what I imagine. It's probably the idea that he's holding her very close right here and they're in a sweet embrace and he's looking at her and he's like, you're beautiful, your eyes. And he's just getting lost in her eyes. That's the image of what's going on here. But then notice that she responds to his compliment with a compliment. Behold, you are handsome, my beloved. Indeed, so pleasant. Right? So apparently they are physically attracted to one another. And this is something we talked about with my group. Physical attraction is not a bad thing. It is just a bad foundation for a relationship. A lot of the relationships that we see nowadays in our broader culture are built off two things: beauty and charm. If you go to the dating apps, what do they tell you to do? They tell you to upload pictures of yourself to demonstrate your beauty, and then they give you a certain amount of characters to put a caption about yourself to demonstrate your wittiness or your charm, right? Well, the Bible says that charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, right? And so we know that charm and beauty are not things to build a relationship upon. However, that doesn't mean that they're inherently bad things. This guy is a charming individual, and apparently he finds the girl beautiful and she finds him handsome. So physical attraction is not a bad thing, and I would actually suggest it is a good thing. But if that's the foundation of this relationship, it's not going to last, and it's not going to be healthy, and it's not going to be life-giving. Because what happens whenever that physical attraction is off one day? Or what happens whenever this person gets injured and doesn't look how they once did? That's going to affect things. That's not what their relationship is built upon. Their relationship is built upon their conduct towards one another, how they live, how they love, the way that they are known, and their reputation, their character. That's what their relationship is built upon. But then fuel is added to the fire of their romance because of that physical attraction. And they find each other beautiful. And what I love here, as you go through verse 16 and verse 17, is that the woman begins to picture their life together. And you almost get the image that this young couple is on a stroll through the woods, or that they're just out in public exploring the forest together. And the way I picture it is that they're lying in the middle of a meadow. And this is what she says: "Indeed, our couch is luxuriant. The beams of our house are cedars, our rafters cypresses." The word for couch there could also be translated as bed, and the word for luxuriant, in some translations, you might see it translated as green or verdant. It's nature imagery, right? She's looking at the nature that they're surrounded by, and she's picturing a life together. She's picturing their future together, because that is what the effect of this guy's love has done to her. She sees how lovely and amazing he is, and she can't help but picture a future with this guy. And she's laying there next to him in the grass out in public. Once again, they're being very mature, and they're being responsible in how they're pursuing this relationship. And they're laying here, and as they're in the grass, she's like, "Man, this grass is like our bed. And these trees are like the walls of our house. And those branches, those could be like the roof of our house." And she's looking around, and she's picturing them building a house together and building a life together. And so you see them growing closer in this relationship. They're not on the verge of marriage yet, but they're getting closer there, right? The attraction is there, and now we're in this dating phase, and very quickly that evaluation is coming out in the affirmative. She's looking at this guy, and she's like, "This is a guy I would love to marry. This is a guy I would love to build a house with. This is a guy I would love to build a family with." And once again, we have to realize that this song is mainly from her perspective, so we don't get to see his perspective as much. But I can guarantee you that he's on the same boat, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't be sending off these signals that would be doing this. Yes, there are some guys who do manipulate girls into feeling this way, but from what we've seen about this guy, he's not that type of guy. If she is feeling this way, it is because he is being intentional and clear in the way that he communicates. Speaking of which, we go into chapter 2 here, and this is where it just gets even better, right? These are some of my favorite verses. What we're about to cover in these next few minutes are some of my favorite verses in the entire song, and I wish that we had more time to go through them. And I mean, I guess I have as much time as I want, but I'm going to try to be concise. The guy doesn't speak often, but when he does speak, his words are like, they're intentional, right? I love that. This guy is an expert at honesty, communication, and clarity. And I would say those are probably the three most important things you could ever have in a relationship: honesty, communication, and clarity. Those are the most important things. And this guy is an expert at all of them. He always speaks honestly, he always speaks clearly, and he always communicates well. And when I say communicates well, I'm not suggesting that he says a lot of words, right? But when he does speak, every word he says counts. And so notice what she says. She says, "I'm a rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys." Sharon, or Sharon, it's a plain up northern Israel, a very luxuriant and lush area. It's over on the coast of the Mediterranean, in between Mount Carmel and like Caesarea area, Joppa, right? Like anywhere up between there. It's a very luxuriant area, to be contrasted by En Gedi, right? En Gedi was a desert wasteland, but Sharon is beautiful. It's amazing. And she says, I'm a rose of Sharon, right? The word for rose there is probably referring to a different flower, not a rose, but it's a very beautiful flower, right? She says that she is a beautiful flower, but she's a beautiful flower in a place where there's a bunch of beautiful flowers. She's a rose of Sharon. There's a bunch of pretty flowers in Sharon. There's a bunch of lilies in the valleys. That's where lilies grow. Lilies grow in valleys. So she's saying, yes, I'm beautiful. There's a lot of beautiful women, because he keeps complimenting her on her beauty, right? He says, you're beautiful, you're beautiful, you're beautiful. And she accepts that compliment. She says, yeah, okay, I'm beautiful. And she's not bragging here. She's being very humble. And we know this from the beginning, right? She said, I'm dark yet lovely. So she knows that she is physically attractive, but she's also deeply aware of her insecurities. And so she's voicing that same insecurity here. She's like, yeah, okay, maybe I am physically attractive, but there's a bunch of physically attractive women. What sets me apart from them? There's nothing. I'm just a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And then the way that this guy responds, he says this. Just imagine from this girl's perspective how these words feel. He says, like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the daughters. He says, honey, you're not a lily of the valleys. You're not just one lily of thousands. No, you are a lily amongst the thorns. Every other girl is like a thorn to me. I don't want them. I'm not attracted to them. I'm not drawn to them. I'm only drawn to you. You are a sign of life in the midst of death, right? So he views her in the same way that she views him. Once again, you have this reciprocity between them. They're both attracted to one another. They're both committed to one another. They both desire one another. And he knows the perfect words to say, because she says, yes, I'm beautiful, but what makes me special? There's a lot of beautiful girls. And he says, none of the girls can compare to you. You're one in a million. Every other girl, all the other beautiful girls, they're brambles. They're thorns. You are a lily. I want to reach through the thorns. I don't care how much they cut me up just to get to you. That's what I want. You are the only one I have eyes for. That's what he's communicating to her. He says, like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the daughters. This is communicating that they are still fairly young, right? So she is amongst the daughters. She is amongst the young women. And it's just such beautiful imagery. I could spend so much longer on it, but I got to move on. I'm sorry. I could talk about this forever. Like lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the daughters. And so, given the fact that he said this, look how she responds. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the sons. Right? So you have this parallel, right? He compares her to something amongst the daughters, and she compares him to something amongst the sons. So you have the idea that they're both a young couple. She's a young woman. He's a young man. And he has said the perfect words to soothe her insecurities. And she responds and says, right back at you. You're the only one I want. You're an apple tree in the midst of a forest. Everybody else, all the other young men, they're just trees. You're an apple tree. You're the one who has fruit to give. You're the one who nourishes me. You're the one who I long to go to. You're the one who my eyes are drawn to. You are the most magnificent tree in all the forest. That's how my beloved is among the sons. In his shade, I had great desire and sat down, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. So this is really cool. She says that she sits in his shade. Well, we know where her first insecurity came from, right? She said that her skin was dark because she'd been spending time in the sun. But this guy is like a tree which gives her shade, right? So this is a guy who knows how to get rid of her every insecurity. And as a result, she loves to sit in his shade. The more time she spends with this guy, the more at ease and the more comfortable she feels. And the more she feels that she can be herself because he loves her for who she is, not because of just her looks and not because of just any of the artificial things that people so often value. It's because he chooses to love her. And he chooses to look back past her deficiencies. And he chooses to move beyond the things that most people would look down upon. And he chooses to love her simply because it's his choice. And simply because she is the one he has chosen. Right? This is how he feels towards her. And as a result, she feels totally secure. And she feels rest. And she feels protection in him. And she trusts him more and more and more. In his shade, I had great desire and sat down. And his fruit was sweet to my taste. Right? The more she spends with this guy, the more she desires him. And what we're going to see is that this desire is not just an emotional desire. It is a physical and, dare I say, sexual desire. And she's going to have to wrestle through that in just a second. And so she's sitting here and she's like, man, this guy knows how to get to me. These are the perfect words. Everything he says is so beautiful and so perfect and so lovely that she just wants to sit there and eat from the fruit that he has to give. Everything he is providing her with is like nourishment that sustains her. And then she says this, he has brought me to his house of banqueting, and his banner over me is love. So, house of banqueting, right there, the phrase actually means house of wine, right? It's not the same. It's not to be confused with the banqueting hall from earlier in chapter 1. He has brought me to the house of wine, and his banner over me is love. Let's start with the second part. His banner over me is love. The word for banner there, it's referring to like a banner that armies would carry into battle, holding it over like to identify the army, right? His identifying badge for her, his banner floating over her, was love. This is the Hebrew word ahava, right? We see that their relationship is progressing more and more and more, so that now as they go in public, he is making it very clear that this is the girl that he is pursuing. His banner over her is love. He has made it clear to everybody, that's my girl. That's the one I want to be with. He's not like one of those swindly, nasty, terrible, deceptive guys who will say all the perfect, right, sweet words to a girl in private and then avoid her and ignore her in public. He's not like that. No, this is a guy who he says the perfect words to her in private, and then whenever he's in public, he doesn't change. He's the same guy. She goes in public with him, and his banner over her is love. He is demonstrating this is the girl that I love. And whenever we say love here, I'm not just using it in the hallmark, feelsy, affection way. I'm talking about this is him saying, this is the girl that I choose to love. He's identifying himself with her. Everybody knows that this is the girl that is loved by him. This is his darling. This is his beloved. This is his raya. That's what the word darling is in Hebrew. And as a result, she says, and this is back to the beginning of verse 4, he has brought me to his house of wine. It's the idea of them going to the house of wine again. This is not the first time we've heard about wine in this story, right? And once again, I'm just saying the word banqueting there, it's referring to wine. We heard about this at the very beginning of the song. She said, kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, for your love is better than wine. So we saw early on in the song, in the early stages of attraction, she says, the way that you treat me is so amazing that I want physical intimacy with you, right? She was like, I just want you to kiss me right now. Well, now we're even further in the relationship. And now she feels him, like just the things that he is doing has metaphorically drawn her to the house of wine. She is getting intoxicated on this love once again. And as with before, so now she is going to be left desiring more physical intimacy. And that's something that I really try to highlight with my students. What we're going to see in verses 5 and 6 is an honest portrayal of sexual attraction. And it's a healthy portrayal of sexual attraction. And it's not a bad thing. Because what we're going to see in verse 7, and that's what we're going to end with today, is that she's going to use self-control in this expression of desire. Because we have to realize that the Bible is not against sex. The Bible loves sex in its appropriate context. And we have to realize this is the case with all desires. There's a lot of desires that are really good, but they can only be truly expressed in an appropriate context. Same thing with anger, right? Anger can be a great thing when expressed at the appropriate time. When it's expressed at the inappropriate time, it becomes sin. Same thing here. And so what we're going to see in verses 5 and 6 is that as a result of this man's love, and as a result of the way that he has treated her so lovingly and amazingly, her sexual desire for him is going to be blossoming, and she is going to desire to give herself to this man, but she's going to rein herself in, and she's going to say, no, not yet. The time has not yet arrived to awaken love, right? And so he's taken her to the house of wine, right? She is getting intoxicated on this love again. And just like in chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, she's like, man, I just want to be intimate with you. Kiss me with the kiss of your mouth. But now it's going further. He has brought me to his house of banqueting, and his banner over me is love. And as a result of his public clarity, communication, honesty, the consistency that he's shown, this is what she says. Sustain me with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples, because I am lovesick. She's presumably talking to her friends right now. And she is turning to her girls. She says, girls, if this goes any further, you're going to have to go grab me some raisin cakes and apples because I am getting exhausted by these emotions that I am feeling. Because the effect that he is having on her is so overwhelming that it exhausts her. But at the same time, she wants more of it because she can't get enough of this guy. And so she needs something to fuel her system so that she has more to go off of. But at the same time, at this time period in this culture, raisin cakes and apples were viewed as aphrodisiacs or sexual stimulants, right? This is stuff that, once again, the science behind it's kind of iffy. But in this culture, this is how they viewed it. This is something that you would go give to newlywed couples to help them have a good honeymoon, right? And that's where this girl is at. She was like, I would marry this guy right now if I could, because he is doing everything right. And he's not just doing it in private. He is in public declaring his love for her and making it clear that his intentions are to pursue her. And so we see that they are going beyond just attraction. They are moving their way quickly towards courtship and eventually marriage. He has made that clear. And as a result of his clarity and as a result of his character, she's like, ladies, you're about to have to go get me some raisin cakes because this is driving me nuts. I am wanting to be with this guy. She is overwhelmed by her desire for him. And then you get to verse 6. Let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. All you have to do is to picture this in order to understand what she's communicating. She is wanting him to sweep her off her feet. Left hand under the head, right arm embracing her. She is wanting him to hold her so close. And in this culture, you've got to realize, if you're holding somebody that close, you are not stopping at a simple embrace, right? So in her head, she is wanting to give herself, her body, to this man. That is what his effect is having on her. This is the effect of his love, the effect of his character, the effect of his righteous and godly character towards her. It is producing a healthy sexual desire where she is like, man, I am desiring to give myself to you right now. And guess what? That is not inherently sinful. I think it's important for people to know that because a lot of the times in our churches, we treat it like if you have sexual desire, you are sinning. No, it's what you do with that sexual desire because God gave us the ability to desire these things in order to hopefully propel us towards marriage, right? He gave us those desires to incline us to pursue this most amazing relationship that two humans could possibly have. And that's what this couple's going to do. As they get to this point, they're going to realize, oh shoot, we probably need to step this up and we need to start pursuing marriage. And that's what Paul talks about whenever you get to his epistles. He says, hey, if you are burning with passion, get married. Right? And that's what this girl is doing. She is beginning to burn with passion for this guy. And the passion itself is not sinful. It's only if you pursue it beyond where you're supposed to go. Because guess what? At this point in the story, if this were not a book of the Bible, if this was like a Nicholas Sparks book or movie, I can tell you that the man and the woman at this point would get physically intimate. Right? Because she is so overwhelmed by him that she would just give herself to him, and usually the crowd would applaud at that. But they're not married. And this woman knows that. And so she has this healthy sexual desire, but look what she says to her friends in verse 7. I call you to solemnly swear, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. So this woman is very wise and very discerning. She sees the things she's feeling, and she is aware of what's going on inside of her, and she knows that these aren't inherently bad things, but she knows the time is not yet come to awaken love. And so she turns to her friends and says, daughters of Jerusalem, I need you to make me a promise. Don't awaken love before it's time, because that's what she's doing. And I mentioned this back last week, how the way I view this song is almost like an older couple telling these younger girls, the daughters of Jerusalem, their story. Right? And they're telling them the story in order to teach them lessons. And so here you have this woman who is probably the one predominantly telling the story. And as she gets to this point, you can imagine the little girls getting into it and they're like, oh, he's so sweet. Oh, it's so amazing. And you can imagine their desires growing inside of them as the woman describes how this man is treating her. And then she turns to them and says, daughters of Jerusalem, make me a promise. Don't awaken love too early. Because that's something that she knew not to do. Right? Her sexual desire was for him, and she wanted nothing more than to be with him. But she knew that they were not married, so she reined it in. The time to awaken love has not yet come. And guess what? In a few chapters, we're going to see them awaken love. And we're going to see her literally say, wake up and have your fill of love. We're going to see that happen. But now is not yet the time. Right now, they're not yet married. And so the desire is there, and that's good, because the desire is going to propel them towards marriage. It is actually a godly thing meant to keep them from being stagnant so that they're just in this relationship not knowing what they're doing. It is forcing them to pursue each other even more. And that's what we're going to see in the weeks to come. One thing I did want to highlight, just because I found this really cool, and I only discovered this a few days ago. Whenever it says by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, you can already get the imagery of what she's saying right there, because gazelles and hinds of the field, these are very energetic animals that are just bounding over the hills. And so here she is caught in this very energetic moment where she is just wanting to give herself to this man. She says, daughters of Jerusalem, I know that at times you can be like a gazelle or a hind, just like going over the hills with all this energy because you just want to give yourself to the man. I charge you to swear by them that you will not do this prematurely. But what's very interesting is that whenever you read this in Hebrew, there actually seems to be a play on words, because the phrase by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field is roughly, and I'm going to butcher this pronunciation right here, it's roughly bitzbaot ha belayot ha shadeh. Right? That's what it is in Hebrew. If you go to other places in the Bible, or just other places in Hebrew culture, where they swear by the name of God, where they say by the Lord of hosts and by El Shaddai, it's a very similar phrase. It says, Bi Shabaot ha Ba'el Shaddai. And so the two phrases are very similar to one another, and it seems like there's an intentional play on words going on here, because I've mentioned how the name of God does not show up in the Song of Songs, very similar to like the book of Esther, where the name of God doesn't show up. And God isn't specifically mentioned in the Song of Songs, except for maybe at one place in chapter 8. But right here, we see that despite the name of God not being mentioned, there is seemingly an allusion to the name of God, but it's still staying consistent with the nature imagery that we have going on in the song, right? And so rather than just breaking into it and just being like, hey, by the way, this is a theological point. God doesn't want you to sleep with somebody you're not married with. Rather than just saying that, she uses the imagery of nature, which is pretty much the running theme throughout the whole song, and she uses the imagery of nature to allude to God, right? So if you're reading it in Hebrew, you read by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, but it sounds very similar to, I charge you in the name of God himself and Almighty God, don't arouse and awaken love before it pleases, right? So she's charging them to a solemn oath before God, but she's using a play on words, which I just think is very fascinating because it shows that this really is an issue between man and God, right? You do this out of respect for God and his commandments, and that's why you don't awaken love before it pleases. And that's the main thing I really wanted my students to get across, because I think that this is really an issue that in our churches we have not done a good job of addressing, because we have made sex almost a taboo subject, and that's why we don't talk about it very much, because it's a very nuanced thing, but we get so uncomfortable talking about it because it's also a very intimate thing, and especially with teenagers who are probably dealing with this more than anybody else, we get afraid to talk about it. But they're the ones who need to hear it. We all need to hear it. Our culture is so sexually perverse that we really need the church to step up their game and produce a biblical ethic of sexuality. And just presenting sex as a bad thing or a taboo subject you don't talk about is not going to cut it, because that's just going to lead kids to be rebellious, or it's going to teach them to have an unhealthy view of sex, right? And I've heard horror stories of Christian couples who have saved themselves for marriage, but by the time they actually gave themselves to the other person, they felt guilty about it, because little did they know it, but they had actually mistakenly come to the impression that sex itself was sinful. And even though they were doing it in a good and holy manner, they felt guilty about it afterwards. And that's sad. I think we need to help teach people a healthy sexual ethic and say, yes, sex is designed by God and he wants you to desire it. But the reason he wants you to desire it is so that it propels you towards marriage, so that eventually your desire for this person will make you pursue one another so that you can give yourself to them in the most amazing way possible. And surely enough, that's exactly what we're going to see in the weeks to come, right? The next step is going to be courtship, where starting in chapter 2, verse 8, we are going to see an intentional step towards marriage as this couple takes the next step and they say, all right, you know what? We've decided. We have done the evaluation. We have seen that you are a person worth pursuing. Let's take the next step and let's actually be intentional about moving towards marriage. And that's what we're going to see. I'm really excited for it. I hope y'all are as well. But this video has already been long enough. Thank you so much. There's just so much more to talk about here, and I hope y'all go more in depth because it is really a great book with so many amazing things. But my name is David Tate. This is Now Let's Be Honest. Be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy, and I will see y'all next time. God bless.
You read a verse, you sing a hymn, the money's in the plate. Sundays you mark out for him, but even then you show up late. You bought the shirt, you wear the cross, but sin throughout the week. 30 shekels and a noose, you kiss him on the cheek.